welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream, and I'll be your host this morning. Today we have Emperor Energy Director Phil McNamara, who will be providing us with an update on the company's 100% owned Judith Project offshore Gippsland Basin in Victoria. Following the presentation, Phil will address any questions that you may have, and we'll attempt to get through as many questions as time permits. Please feel free to send through your questions via the chat platform, in the question pane in the GoToWebinar control panel, or simply email them to me, alex@investorstream.com.au. You can also download a copy of the presentation by navigating to the handouts pane in the control panel. A copy of the webinar will be available on Emperor's website and social media platforms later today. But for now, I'd like to throw it over to Phil, who's going to get us underway. Phil, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Morning, everyone. Phil McNamara speaking, Director of Emperor Energy. Pleased to have you on board for the webinar. This is the first time I've done one of these, so you may have to bear with me while we work through a couple of little difficulties, but we'll get moving. I'll move to page 2, which is our disclaimer. I won't continue with that. All right, on to the highlights. Just move this out of the way. Okay, sorry, here we go. Emperor Energy, 100% owner and operator of the Judith gas field. Judith's located in the offshore Gippsland Basin, originally drilled in 1989 by Shell. It's 40 kilometres offshore, south of the Orbis gas plant that is owned by APA, currently processing gas from the Sol field owned by Cooper Energy. So we're located about 300 kilometres east of Melbourne. We have an independent resource statement completed in 2019 by 3D Geo. That provides us with a 2C contingent resource of sales gas at 150 BCF. That's located around the original Judith well drilled by Shell in 1989. There's a further P50 unrisked prospective resource throughout the Judith gas field or the Judth Structure. It's been estimated at 1.2 TCF within Emperor's permit boundary. From a commercialisation perspective, we've been dealing with APA for some time. We have an MOU in place with APA relating to the gas project, and we currently have a binding contract in place to progress with the pre-front-end engineering design of the development of the gas processing plant, a 40-kilometre subsea pipeline, and then an export pipeline that would link up to the Eastern Gas Pipeline that runs from Melbourne to Sydney and allows gas to be sold anywhere along that system. We've completed dynamic modelling recently to look at how the field could produce. That modelling shows that with 4 initial production wells and then a 5th well in year 15, we can maintain a production rate of 80 million cubic feet, standard cubic feet per day of gas into the plant. To get that in perspective in terms of electrical generation capability, which I think is a good reference point, if that was delivered to a combined cycle generation plant, that's gas turbine and steam generation, then would be the 80 million feet per day is the equivalent of 500 megawatts of continuous electricity generation. That's equivalent to a quarter of the Liddell Power Station or a significant part of Hazelwood that shut a few years ago. The global acquisition company, CGG, they've recently completed a multi-client 3D seismic survey across the entire Gippsland Basin. That covers the Judith gas field as well. That's like a gift for us in that it would have been very, very difficult for Emperor Energy to organise further seismic, but it's been done on the basis of it being organised originally and underwritten by Exxon. We get commercial access to that 3D seismic results with the first raw data available in November this year. We've also engaged international well consultants and managers, AGR, to commence with the planning and design of the Judith 2 exploration well. We're located right in the middle of the Gippsland Basin. It's Australia's premier hydrocarbon province. There's a lot of infrastructure. There are a lot of opportunities to get to market. We're progressing with discussions on potential exploration partners, and the exploration partner becomes a fundamentally important to us, as that is where we would gain the majority of our funding to drill the Judith 2 well. Move to the next slide, corporate snapshot. We did a share consolidation about 2 years ago. There's only 100 million shares on issue at present. We're trading at about 4 cents. You can see the graph there. We've been on the move lately in the last few weeks since we announced an update of where we're up to with APA on the start of the pre-feed work. The board and management own some stock. The top 20 shareholding is fairly tight, and the top 20 shareholders tend not to trade too much. The management team, I'm a director. My background is in mining and in oil and gas. I was the startup managing director of Armour Energy, and prior to that, the managing director of Waratah Coal. Carl Dumbrell is also a director. He's a very safe pair of hands in the finance sector. He's very good at ensuring the company's compliance is correct. Carl and I have been working closely together for about 4 years on this. I've been a director for about 18 months. Carl's been a director for 5 years. Nigel Harvey, also a director and independent, doesn't carry out any executive roles. Former investment banker, AFSL license holder, gives us some additional skills in the finance sector. Malcolm King has been a director, elected to move back to a role as consultant. He's a very important person for us. He brings 30 years of experience in the upstream oil and gas exploration business. He's been in business development. He's very heavily involved in Shell's floating LNG plant. He's been involved in JV management and a long career with Shell. And one of the important things about Malcolm is he was the wellsite geologist with Shell when the Judith 1 well was drilled in 1989. And as Malcolm says, Judith is full of gas. It's a tighter field. It's not a super high porosity permeability field, but it's a big structure, and from his perspective, there's a significant resource in there. And also Jeff Geary on the team, he's our consulting geologist, an extensive career in the offshore Gippsland Bass Strait area, knows the area very, very well. We also use 3D Geo as the independent geologists for our resource statements, and they also do a large volume of our geological work with Jeff. Next slide. There are some favourable macro drivers running at the moment. The Morrison government's announced that they intend to step into the electricity market in Australia and underpin it and underpin the electricity prices with a government-funded construction of a gas-fired power plant at Kurri Kurri in the Hunter Valley. There's an ex-aluminium smelter site there that obviously has good access to the electricity grid. The Morrison government says if the private sector won't come to the party and replace the electricity generation capacity that's going to be lost at Liddell Power Station, then the government will intervene. Alan Finkel on the left there has made it quite clear that if Australia wants to go forward with renewable energy, then it's fundamental that there is gas available for rapid startup gas-fired electricity generation that can offset the fact that renewables are not a continuous supply of electricity. Next slide. Quick look at the Gippsland. There's been a lot of oil and gas come out of the Gippsland Basin. You can see the Emperor Energy Permit, Vic P47, shaded in pink there. It's right in the middle of that field. We're talking about the Judith Structure, which is shown as the prospective resource area in yellow. More than 50% of the structure is in Emperor Energy's permit. Part of it to the left or the west is in ExxonMobil's permit. There's the recent Sol development by Cooper Energy. It is now delivering gas to the Orbis plant on close to the shoreline. That's now owned and controlled by APA, who we're progressing the pre-feed with. And Judith's also very, very close to the Kipper field, which is part of the Kipper Tuna Tarim development that was completed about 2 years ago by ExxonMobil at about a $5 billion plus investment. Judith's located about 5 kilometres from Kipper. Next slide. A bit more detail about the permit area. You can see Judith in the bottom of the permit. It's a 200 square kilometre permit. It was renewed for 5 years in 2018. As I previously mentioned, it was first drilled by Shell in 1989. Another well drilled at Moby in the north in 2004, but that's not part of our focus at this point. Now, since 2017, Emperor's been very focused on Judith and focused on getting the data and the detail as correct as possible, using an extensive first principles approach to analyse everything so that the data we have and the facts that we put on the table are as accurate as they can be. We don't rely on anyone else's previous assumptions, previous information. We've redone everything from the start. So we reprocessed the vintage 3D seismic that was shot in the mid-2000s. We've done detailed seismic interpretation and mapping of the structure. We did a complete petrophysics study with a petrophysics expert in the Gippsland Basin, looking closely at analysis of the porosities, the permeabilities, and the water saturations. That data comes from the original 1989 Shell drilled well. We put together a static model of the field based on the data that we have, and a FASIS model that was developed, and then we've done the dynamic modelling to get a production simulation. And at the end of all of that work came an independent resource statement. Next slide, you can see the proximity of the other gas fields here, and once again a zoom in further. At the bottom of the Vic 47 permit, you can see the greater Judith structure in yellow, and the red section there around the Judith 1 well is where the contingent 150 BCF contingent resource sits. To the west, you can see Longterm and southeast Longterm. They're about 15 kilometres away, and Kipper only like 5 kilometres to the south of Judith. Next slide. This is an image from the static model, which is developed from seismic interpretation. You can see the scale of the Judith structure, the Judith prospect. If you look to the west, you can see the scale of the Longterm fields and the elevations of the structure. The key point with Judith is that the Judith 1 well was drilled on 2D seismic by Shell in 1989, and they're drilled on a localised rollover. And you can see that it's way, way down dip from the top of the structure. It's actually 750 metres from the Judith 1 gas sand in the Judith well to the Judith gas sand at the top of the structure. So it is a very big structure with a potentially very, very high gas column. And you can see the producing Kipper field then to the east. That's in the Golden Beach Formation. The Kipper field is in the Golden Beach Formation. The Judith structure, or the producing sands of the Judith field, not producing sands, the gas-bearing sands of the Judith field are within the Emperor group, and that's where the company name has been derived. Next slide. This is a correlation of the Longterm wells to the west across the Judith. And when we started looking at the seismic, we started to look at, was there continuity of the Longterm gas sands through and underneath the Judith 1 well? And the seismic interpretation shows us that there is that continuity. You can see the line A to A dash underneath. In the diagram, it shows the cross-section that we're looking at in these well logs. If you look in the Longterm 2 well, one of the key points there is that there was a DST, a drill stem test, done in that well that flowed at 13 million standard cubic feet of gas per day. Significant DST test. If you follow that line, which is around the Longterm 100 sandstone series, if you take that across to the right, that actually sits underneath the Judith 1 well. So the Judith 1 well did not penetrate what we refer to as the Longterm sands. The Longterm's 300, 200, 100 sands. That adds part of the excitement to the Judith 2 exploration well. Our plan is to drill the Judith 2 well 700 metres up dip, drill it to about the same total depth, 3,000 metres, as the Judith 1 well. But in the process of doing that, we will intersect the Longterm 300, 200 and 100 sands, and that's the sand where the high DST occurred in the Longterm 2 well. Next slide shows the Judith structure, the depth map. In the middle there you can see the Judith 1 well and the 1C, 2C contingent resource is the small area around that, and then the prospective resource extends further out to the property or the permit boundaries to the west and to the top of the structure in the north. Next slide, here's a breakup of the, if I go back to that slide of the Judith structure depth map, it shows some of the faulting that has occurred, and that's resulted in us having a resource statement that's broken up into different compartments as the current interpretation of those faults sits. The 150 BCF contingent resource is in the top part of the table, and then the total prospective resource 1.2 TCF at the bottom of the P50 column. Next slide, dynamic modelling. So with a detailed static model in place, we've then progressed to get the dynamic modelling done, which simulates production. We looked at various approaches. The last lot of dynamic modelling we put in place has straightforward vertical production wells, 4 of them at the commencement of the production simulation and a 5th well introduced in year 15. So that simulation is providing us with the 80 million cubic feet per day production rate. The simulation is maintaining that rate for 25 years, and we're maintaining adequate wellhead pressure to deliver to the plant feasibility study that's being done for August. The fifth well in year 15 was required to maintain pressure, but with that in place, the pressure is maintained through 25 plus years. We have assumed a 450 metre gas column height in the modelling. We know from Longterm, where the structure is much smaller, that there was a 465 metre gas column. So we're relatively confident that 450 metres is a reasonable assumption on the gas column height. What was proven in the Judith 1 well in 1989 is that there is movable gas in the Judith gas sands at the Judith 1 well, although it was drilled a long way down dip and very close to the gas water contact, and as a result, the full scale or height of the gas column was not determined. Just in terms of scale of potential resource, or the prospective resource here, the 1.2 TCF at Judith is the prospective number. The 150 BCF is the contingent around Judith 1. We look down here and see some of the comparable numbers. Sole under development and now producing with Cooper, it's 236 BCF. The Manta field is on Cooper Energy's development horizon. It's to the southeast of Judith, and then the very large Kipper and Tarim volumes. The long-term resource numbers considerably smaller. Now on to APA. We commenced confidential discussions with APA in mid-2018. Our view was that we needed to have a route to commercialisation. We needed to be able to get gas to market if we were to prove that with an exploration well, if we could prove that there was a big enough resource and then reserve to justify field development, we needed to know how to get to market. We looked at the various opportunities of existing infrastructure in the basin. There's the Exxon infrastructure, there's the Patricia Baleen infrastructure, and we decided that with the scale of the Judith gas field as it was, that there was sufficient size, sufficient resource potential to look at development of a standalone offshore pipeline, subsea pipeline and plant. That's what we approached APA with. Those discussions continued on, and then we got to a point where we signed an MOU with APA in October 2019. We established some terms for the pre-front-end engineering design, which is essentially the technical pre-feasibility study, including costings. And then we executed a contract with APA to do that work in May 2020, and then the work commenced in September. So the APA pre-feed involves the pre-feed design of the gas plant, a subsea pipeline 40 kilometres in length out to the gas field, and an export pipeline that would take production from the gas plant north and connect into the Eastern Gas Pipeline. Along with that, refinement of costs of the project and sufficient understanding of the cost structure for us to be able to do a pre-feasibility financial analysis. From my perspective, APA and the Orbost gas plant site provide clear potential for a route to market for the Judith gas field on a standalone basis, and the challenge for us now is to drill the well and prove that the resource is there, turn that to a reserve, and head towards project development. AGR, next slide, AGR Well Management. We've taken the view and made a decision to engage AGR on the basis that we don't internally have the expertise to manage a well. Malcolm's got a lot of expertise, but not enough to fully manage a well, and we're not a company of sufficient size to do that, so we need to outsource that skill set. AGR are quite capable of doing that. They manage wells, well, they've managed a lot of wells globally. So they've done the preliminary design. The diagram on the right, it's a bit hard to see, but it shows the production casing sizes and the casings on various intervals of the well. That's done. So the preliminary well design is done with casing design and well costings in place. We have the regulatory timeline laid out, and AGR have done a survey of the drill rig market. We've had a response from 5 contractors, drilling contractors, and from there we've been able to get a cost estimate together based on time to drill and the expressions of interest pricing. That puts the well at about $25 million before drill stem tests. So drill stem tests occur in the success case, and cost. There are additional costs associated with doing that. The more drill stem tests that are carried out, obviously, the more costs are incurred. Next slide, CGG, the multi-client 3D seismic survey. This was commissioned by ExxonMobil. CGG are a global seismic survey company, originally French-based. The seismic survey was done to cover most of the Gippsland Basin. This is probably the last seismic survey that will be carried out because of various environmental issues associated with it. It has been completed in July 2020. It's been done with the most modern techniques available. The trailing cables and geophones on the seismic vessel were over 7 kilometres long. One of the issues that we have at Judith is the structure is quite steeply dipping, and that tends to cause loss of data reflection or loss of reflected seismic from the steep dip sections of the structure due to the reflected seismic pulses missing the trailing cables or the geophone cables of the seismic vessel. This survey has been done with very, very long geophone cables, and it's been done in an orientation that gives us luckily for us, it gives us the best orientation in relation to the shape of the structure. As Malcolm says, we can expect to see data quality that is orders of magnitude better than what we've dealt with in the past. Now, CGG are in the business of doing that and then selling the data to multi-clients, multi-customers. So we've entered into the discussions, and we have various proposals from CGG for us to purchase seismic data as it's processed and put together, ready for interpretation. Now, our understanding is the first parts of raw data will be available to us in November 2020. We see that as a significant point where we'll get another look at a completely new set of seismic information. We'll get another look at the Judith structure. So this is important for us. It provides us with this new data will provide us with the most accurate mapping possible. It'll help resolve the location of faults within the gas field. That will help us minimise risks with drilling, and it should improve the seismic amplitude response, which should improve confidence about the accumulation of movable gas through the entire structure. To the next slide, near-term value catalysts. Where are we up to? We're continuing discussions towards securing a project partner. Obviously, the new seismic that's becoming available has an influence on the way that's perceived by various companies. They'd obviously like to see that data as we move forward. We will see information coming out of the pre-feed study with APA at the back end of the year. That will allow us to put together a financial analysis from APA's pre-feed data, along with the work that we've had AGR do on the Judith exploration well, and we're also getting AGR to do some costing work for us on what the field development wells would cost. As I said, the multi-client data from CGG becomes available later this year. I think that's going to be an exciting point for us. And in addition to that, we have got a permit application in. I can't sort of reveal where that is, but we do have a permit application, and we are awaiting results. So that gets us to the end. I've got Carl's email and my email there if anyone wants to email me with any questions, and the company phone number. There we go. That it's nice and clear.
Thanks, Phil.
Are you there, Alex?
I am, mate. Look, really, really interesting presentation, and we have had a couple of questions come through. So if you just bear with me, we've had a couple come through. The first question, Phil, can you give us a flavour for some of the parties that are in or have been in the data room? Are they EMP players and industrial companies wanting to lock in supply?
There's a group of exploration companies in the Gippsland Basin already. There are other companies around Australia that are always looking for mergers and acquisition opportunities. We're bound up with confidentiality agreements with all of the interested players, but the parties that have been involved are the upstream oil and gas businesses, not so much the end users.
So when this well was drilled last time, can you tell us why it wasn't followed up if it was hydrocarbon bearing?
Well, if we go back to 1989, gas was essentially, well, gas prices were like $2 a gigajoule, $2 per 1,000 standard cubic feet, those sorts of numbers, $1.50. And if you look at what's been developed, the fields that have got very, very high permeability, which allows a single well to produce at very, very high flow rates for a long period of time, were the only sorts of wells that were viable at those sorts of prices. Judith gas field a lower permeability. It's a tighter gas field, but it's not so tight that it won't flow, not so tight that it needs to be fracked. So when Judith 1 was drilled, they did pressure testing. That pressure testing confirms that there is movable gas, but at the same time, they looked at the permeabilities that their logging showed. They had trouble with a storm that sort of interfered with the rig, and Shell decided to plug and abandon the well and keep moving. It didn't come roaring at them like, for example, the Kipper gas field does in the Golden Beach Formation, which sits above the Emperor Group. So it's sat there since 1989, waiting for gas prices to change to make it economic. Our analysis is that if we drill the exploration well and get the results that are in our dynamic modelling and static model, dynamic model production simulation, then it is economic and has a very good NPV and discounted cash flow rate of return.
So just you mentioned obviously the APA involvement, and presumably if APA is undertaking pre-feed, does this indicate a good chance of success?
As I said, we talked to APA for a long period of time before we entered into an MOU. They laid out some of the requirements they had in relation to independent resource statements, some of the milestones that we would need to tick before they would get involved. APA's subsurface team gave it their own internal technical review of the information and the data that we gave them and the independent assessment that we gave them. And from there, they made the view to progress along a path with us of starting to work towards understanding what development would look like. Obviously, the ball's in our court, in Emperor Energy's court, to get the well drilled and prove that the field can deliver. But my mining background says to me that it's no use exploring and finding a producible resource if you can't turn it into a reserve by finding a way to take it to market. So we got off to an early start with APA and got moving towards how to commercialise the field.
So Phil, given EMP's relatively modest market cap, why wouldn't you be a takeover target if a larger party wanted Judith?
Well, we could well become a takeover. It hasn't happened. The market cap's $4 million, so there's a fairly tight shareholding there. Obviously, a takeover requires approval from shareholders, but I guess all shareholders have a price. So at this point in time, there's been no takeover action or any indication of anyone being interested. But obviously, at a $4 million market cap, I don't know what price shareholders would look at as being a reasonable takeover, but obviously we'd have to be a relatively low-cost takeover target for someone.
And can you explain to us your reference to purchasing potential seismic, and what are your plans there?
So CGG will sell the data from the seismic acquisition that they've completed. They sell that at a commercial rate per square kilometre. So we are looking at purchasing the data directly above Judith, so that we can get the most thorough understanding that's technically possible, because this data will be, as I said before, orders of magnitude better than what we have. And we're also looking at acquiring the data or purchasing data across towards Longterm, because the Longterm wells act as an analogue for us. They're the same gas-bearing sands, same formation, and the more we can firm up the correlation across to Longterm, then the more we de-risk the drilling of the Judith 2 well.
Phil, has any work been done on the economics of the Judith field, CapEx or OpEx or projected payback, etc.?
Yes, we've had some external work done. We've developed an economic model. We haven't released any results of that because we need to be able to. There are requirements on what we need to do before we can start talking about project economics. We already have an understanding of what the project economics look like. We think they look good. After the APA pre-feasibility work is done, then we'll have a solid understanding of what the CapEx and OpEx look like for the infrastructure. And as I said before, AGR are now about to progress with a more accurate assessment of field development costs. So we're looking at being able to have a solid set of pre-feasibility economics together by the back end of this year.
Now, I understand that there's still a fair bit of confidentiality required, but can you give us an update on any progress in finding a JV partner?
Yeah, there is confidentiality required there. We are in discussions. We're continuing to talk to potential partners. Obviously, the seismic data that's coming in the initial parts of it in the near future have an influence on people's perceptions. I can't speak for other companies and what they might consider or be prepared to do at this point, Alex.
That's fine, Phil. Is there any progress with the application to NOPTA to vary the tenement conditions and the timeline?
Yeah, there are two key factors there. One is that there's the influence of COVID-19 pandemic, and the second is the fact that there's this new seismic data coming. So we have a deadline coming in towards us next year on drilling time, but we will be looking to extend that out.
And what are the options to fund the well? Have you considered tapping buyers for funding?
There are a range of options. The focus so far has been on the upstream producers. There are various alternatives to put a JV consortium together of various investors that want to look at backing in the upside of the successful Judith 2 well. So we're looking at all combinations of how to make that happen.
If you have any more questions, I understand we might not have got to everything. Please feel free to send them through to me and I can address them to Phil separately and he can forward you the answers later on. But really want to thank you, Phil. Really appreciate your time today and have a great day, everyone. We'll speak to you later.
Thanks, Alex.